statewide literacy co-director, and I'm very happy to be here to kick off the second session. We have an hour and 15 minutes filled with thoughtful and intentional information, resources, and strategies for educators, parents, and others. In fact, we would like to know who is in the room. And so what we're going to do is launch a quick poll to see who is here. Let me go ahead and launch. I'm going to move this forward. And the question we want to know, because we want to know who is in the room, who is joining us today. So if you can tell us if you are a classroom teacher, a paraprofessional, a parent or community liaison, an instructional coach or a specialist, an administrator, and you keep scrolling down, there's institution of higher education faculty, county office specialist, CDE and other state staff, policymaker, or other. And I'm going to wait for about 80%. Thank you. I'm going to end the poll here. Wow, great participation. I'm going to share the results. You'll see we have a pretty good, a great representation and mix of a caring and focused educational community on a very important topic that I know is important to many of us. And so I see a lot of instructional coaches, specialists, which is awesome, administrators, that's so important. Thank you for being here. We have CDE staff, county office specialists. Thank you for joining us. Classroom teachers, thank you for joining us and for everything you do. So California has done a lot of great things around literacy. And thanks to Superintendent Thurmond, we are on a mission to improving literacy in California. I want to go ahead. We have a couple of special guests who are going to be here today. And in a bit, I'll introduce you to State Superintendent Tony Thurmond. And then in a little bit after that, I'll introduce you to Dr. Marilu Gorno-Tempini. Our students in California are super powerful, and when they are able to read, write, speak, and listen, they are empowered even more. And our state superintendent is understanding of that. So, they say that there's a lot of power, like Frederick Douglass says, when you learn how to read, you will forever be free. And State Superintendent understands that. So I'm going to hand it over to Superintendent Thurmond, and he will kick us off with a welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia, and greetings, everyone. Good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We're excited to welcome you to the second installment of the conversation about the ELA ELD framework and what that means for California educators, families, and students. I really appreciate Dr. Garcia's quoting Dr. Frederick Douglass about how literacy can free you. We always talk about when you learn to read, you can read to learn anything. It has the power to unlock opportunity. Sadly, for those who struggle with literacy, they may experience barriers. And so we're grateful that you are on this journey with us. And we think that the ELA ELD framework gives you just about anything that you might need. It goes through all kinds of considerations for how to teach reading, phonemic awareness and foundational knowledge. It provides a real blueprint and a roadmap for how to move the journey forward. And so we're excited that you've joined us for this second installation. You're in store to get treated by a wonderful professional friend and colleague in Dr. Marilu Gorno-Tempini, who's really helped us think differently about students who are at risk for not learning to read, whether that's because of dyslexia or other items that create that risk. And so you're in for a treat with the Dr. Gorno-Tempini and Dr. Hallie Yop-Slowick, who has helped us to create the wonderful document that you have, and Nancy Brynelson, one of our statewide literacy co-directors, and of course, you met Dr. Garcia. One of the things that I love about the ELA ELD framework is that it is so full of resources. One of the things that I think is also an opportunity for us is to break it down because it is so full of resources. And I love that this series gives you a chance to delve into it. We hope that you'll stay with us throughout the series every month and be a part of the conversation, as literacy is our top priority. We're sending $500 million to our school districts to be able to hire reading coaches and specialists. The state legislature has just approved a new literacy roadmap that gives us a way to center the importance of literacy. We want to hear from you about your experiences in students in the early grade spans for whom there may not be any statewide test data, but that you'll send us information to let us know how they are doing that. And we hope that you will join us, as in this year, we plan to roll out professional development for anyone who wants to learn how to teach students to read and wants to really understand literacy. We intend to roll out professional development and access to proven curricula that can help you in doing that. And then you get to choose what you use, but we'll be asking the state through the legislature and the governor to pay for that professional development. No unfunded mandates here. We want you to have access to the best. We want you to choose what makes sense for your families. You know, the ELA, ELD framework gives great care and concern for how to support the needs of our multilingual learners. You're in store for a great treat. And I'm going to stop talking and let you hear from the experts who wrote this incredible document. Again, thank you for being on the journey with us to reading by third grade and literacy for all in our great state of California.
Thank you, Superintendent Thurmond, and thank you for your continued focus and leadership around literacy, allowing us the space and the opportunity to recenter ourselves around this grounding framework. This ELA ELD framework series is developed, and let me switch my screen here, by Dr. Hallie Yacht, Dr. Pam Speecher, and Nancy Brenelson, who are co-authors of the framework, and myself. Today, what we will cover are, we've gone over our opening remarks. We're going to go over context in a second. We're going to talk about reading, writing, comprehension, and the brain, looking at framework guidance, positioning looking at cross-cutting themes, foundational skills, and multilingual students, exploration of the framework, positioning the foundational skills, and we'll end with the closing. Outcomes that we will cover, and we're going to come back and check at the very end of our presentation today to make sure that we actually met these. And that is to learn how brain research has informed the teaching of literacy, understanding the role of foundational skills in literacy, learning what guidance the framework provides, understanding the role of foundational skills for multilingual learners, and identifying resources in the ELA ELD framework to support our instruction. Now I'm going to turn it over to my co-director, Nancy Brenelson.
Welcome, everyone. We'd like to just provide a bit of context, given that this is the second in our series. And last September 26th, we had a presentation and overview. The good news is that is available on Facebook Live and soon to be available on CDE's new literacy webpage. Not quite there yet, but will be shortly. As you heard in that presentation, there are 5 cross-cutting themes in these circles of implementation that bring together the 2 sets of standards. Today, our focus is foundational skills. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy, for centering us around the circles of implementation. I now would like to introduce Dr. Marilu Gorno-Tempini. We are going to move into literacy, language, and the brain. And I am pleased to introduce you, welcome our special guest. Again, Dr. Marilu Gorno-Tempini, who will provide neurocognitive context on language and literacy. Dr. Marilu Gorno-Tempini is a behavioral neurologist and the Charles Schwab Distinguished Professor of Dyslexia and Neurodevelopment at the University of California, San Francisco. After completing her medical degree in clinical neurology specialty training in Italy, Dr. Gorno-Tempini earned a doctorate in the neuroimaging of language from University College London. Her clinical work concentrates on behavioral neurology across the lifespan. Dr. Gorno-Tempini co-founded and directs the UCSF Center, Dyslexia Center, and is a proud founding member and co-director of the UCSF UC Berkeley Schwab Dyslexia and Cognitive Diversity Center. Her research in this setting leverages insights from neuropsychology and brain imaging to understand how dyslexia manifests itself in several different phenotypes. These efforts can lead to more targeted assessments and treatments delivered through both clinical and educational systems. The center brings together neurologists, psychiatrists, biomedical engineers, radiologists, neuropsychologists, speech-language pathologists, and research coordinators to discover structural and functional differences in the brain of children and adults with dyslexia. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you, I'd like to say, have Dr. Marilu Gorno-Tempini come on. Hi, Doctor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I think that introduction can summarize the fact that I'm a professional student, a professional multilingual student. So thank you for having me. And I hope in the few minutes that we have together, I can provide you with some information from the clinical neurosciences that might be useful to your practice. So one aspect that I always like to start with as a perspective is to think about the evolution of language, oral language and written language in the brain, with the perspective that spoken language is an evolutionary old task that we acquired as humans. So we started speaking and understanding oral language about 150,000 years ago. So we had the time to evolve neural systems that are specific to language. And that's why in most right-handed people, language is organized in a specific set of networks in the left hemisphere. On the other hand, written language is a relatively new invention, so it's only about 6,000 years old. And thus, those are not enough generations and enough genetic evolutions, let's say, for us to develop a dedicated brain circuit to reading. And that is why we need to recycle our visual and oral language systems and connect them together to learn written language. And in the vast majority of people, this written language skills need to be explicitly taught. We need to reorganize our brain systems for language and vision to be linked together, and meaning system to be linked together to read efficiently. So the easiness with which we acquired this incredible new task that we invented a few thousand years ago is highly heritable, and is although this organization of language is ubiquitous in all cultures, and it is still highly influenced by the structure of both oral language and written language that have been chosen and evolved in different cultures. And we'll touch a little bit in some of these points in the rest of the presentation. So if Bonnie, you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, another concept that I think might be useful is to think, I mean, you all know that the brain develops different stages, different tasks, and different skills. Children develop different skills and different tasks at different age. We have some gradients that we can consider. So the bottom part of the brain, so I don't think you can see my cursor, but the green and dark blue areas of the brain, so the lower part of the brain develops earlier and then it moves up to the top. And also there is a gradient posterior to anterior. So that is the reason why children use visual, develop knowledge of the visual word first, and develop understanding and hearing skills of language first, and they develop higher level syntactic and comprehension strategies later on, and also why the frontal lobes that are developed later in adolescence, they're the ones that are responsible for attention and motivation, and those are skills that develop later. So there are specific brain maturation stages that correspond to the different aspects of language, oral and written language acquisitions that you observe in your practice. And when you're teaching different skills, you're really creating plasticity and connections within those different systems. As you can see in this very schematic picture, these systems are very interactive with each other. And although we need to create specific connection between the visual, which is the dark blue, and the phonological systems in the brain, which is the light blue, auditory and phonological systems, there is a high connectivity between the system that is semantic system involved in word meaning, and even interactions between the syntax and motivation systems. So all systems are really integrated with each other and influence each other heavily. Next slide, please. So this is why your job as teachers is so complicated and valuable, and is also why every aspect of human behavior that I like to study is complicated. There is a genetic aspect that depends on how our brain system and our genetics have evolved in thousands of years, and there is the environment, and that's why we need to take into account different aspects of brain biology and environment when we think about reading and written language. We need to think about the time of learning and development of the brain. We need to think about the genetically and biologically determined organization of the brain. We need to think about need to think about the environment and the culture in which children and schools and families are living. And we need to think about specific teaching instructions that are necessary to learn how to read. And I like to show the bell curve, which is the basis of distribution of abilities in any biological entity, any biological condition, to really focus us on the idea that there's very few children, and here I call them quote unquote super readers, who will learn and acquire written language. So there's very few children who will learn to read, the ones on the right of the extreme distribution, that will learn to read with very little teaching. But the majority of children with the adequate teaching will learn how to read adequately. And then there is a certain group of children who will need extra help for different reasons. So there is a distribution of abilities that we need to consider. So the examples that I'd like to give today is very briefly examples in which a difference in brain organization can cause a certain combination of strengths and weaknesses in the case of developmental dyslexia, and the case in which an environment of cultural aspect can create a set of strengths and weaknesses depending on the multilingualism status of children and which languages they are required to learn. So in the next slide, we first touch on the multilingual learners and really stressing that although the brain biology is the same in monolingual and multilingual students, there might be multiple strategies that can be useful depending on which language a child speaks. And what the brain sciences so far teaches us is that the L1 and L2, so native language and second language, are largely processed through the same neural structures. But there are some differences, and we're not going to go through the details of this, but there are some differences, and you can see they're much smaller than the common neural network that you also saw in that specific schematic before. There are small differences that depend on some variables that we can consider together. So for instance, how early the second language is being acquired, or the typology of the two languages. So for instance, is the orthography of a language shallow versus deep? So how regular or irregular the phonology to orthography mapping is, or the type of symbolic visual aspects of the language, so logographic versus alphabetic. And how I like to think about it is sometimes I give the examples of different experts in different sports. So you might have, a basketball player and a soccer player. We don't say that they have a biologically different body, but they have been trained on specific sports. And so some of their muscle groups might be stronger than others. And when we try to teach them, when we try to teach a basketball player how to play soccer, we might consider that they might have very strong upper body skills that the soccer player might not have. And when we teach, on the other hand, a basketball player how to play soccer, we can take into account the strength and agility in their feet. So from an instructional point of view, from what we know on the science, and some of the specific studies that we would like to do here have not been done yet, but from what we know so far, the possible instructional implication so far tell us that reading instruction proven effective in English monolinguals should work for bilingual also, with the caveat that we can emphasize certain components, certain strengths that the children come with, depending on which is their native language, the structure of their native language. So the second example that I'd like to briefly give is the example of developmental dyslexia. If we can please go to the next slide. So developmental dyslexia is a specific learning disability of neurological origin. Children and adults show difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition and spelling. And we define dyslexia as a persistent difficulty in the presence of preserved cognitive abilities and adequate instruction. And it is a highly heritable condition, which is often associated with small little changes in the brain. And this is what I'll give you an example of one child that we evaluated at the Dyslexia Center. And we're still studying, and that's part of our goal at the Dyslexia Center, is to really understand the biological basis of dyslexia, which we really don't understand that well yet. But in this particular child, there was a slight little difference that you can see in red and yellow in volume and organization of the part of the brain that really processes how we segment the phonological aspects of language. And so in this child, if we look at our schematic, you can see which area in the network is involved, and I made a scheme with the smaller arrows, so you can see the slightly different connectivity there that corresponds to a phonological weakness. Now, we always want to consider what happens also in the other hemisphere and in other parts of the brain. So in this particular case, this child had a strength in visual processing that is dependent on kind of the asymmetry of these networks in the right hemisphere. So this is a particular schematic on how we can look at strengths and weaknesses in a case of developmental dyslexia. Now, even in the case when there is a neurological base for language difference, and if you can go to the next slide, Bonnie, please. All the factors that we considered before influence the impact that this learning difference can have in someone's written language abilities. So all the environmental factors, instructional factors, and cognitive factors, different strengths and weaknesses, can impact dyslexia. So the cumulative risk and resilience model that was first introduced by Dr. Hugh Katz and Yakov Precher is really a way to think about how we can capitalize in the resilience factor to diminish the impact of dyslexia, even in someone who has heritable weakness into how easily they would learn to written language. So this brings us to, as possible implication, that early identification and intervention are fundamental for children at risk for learning, for difficulties in learning how to read, so that we can really use the resilience factors to remediate the difficulties with a really strength-based approach. And this is another aspect of the work that we're developing at UCSF by developing the Multitudes platform for screening and interventions for dyslexia and reading challenges, including dyslexia. So I hope some of these concepts can be useful for you, and I'll be happy to take questions later. Oh, key points for instruction. Yes.
Yeah, and you know what we can also do, Dr. Gorno-Tempini, is we have a few questions in the chat in the Q&A. So I let individuals and folks know that we will hold off till the end for those questions. And at that point, I think some of those questions will also be about key points for instruction. So we can go ahead and include those at that point.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you just for being here, for your time. We took a lot of time planning, and I have to tell you, Dr. Gorno-Tempini is amazing to collaborate with. Thank you for your patience and just your work. And she'll be sticking around. So if you have other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I am now going to turn it over to Dr. Yap, who is going to tell us about what the framework says about foundational skills. Dr. Yap?
Thank you so much. I have a few minutes to share some key points from the framework in regards to the foundational skills. So on the next slide, Bonnie, if you'll move it forward, we point out that the framework is unequivocal in asserting that the acquisition of the foundational skills is crucial, and that the purpose of acquisition is to enable meaningful engagement as readers and writers with print. This must be made obvious to learners. Importantly, the framework states that instruction should be thoughtfully sequenced and implemented, and research has had much to offer in this regard, and it influenced our work as we wrote the framework. The foundational skills on the next slide include those related to the development of print concepts. Thank you. The foundational skills in the standards are those related to the development of print concepts, phonological awareness, phonics and word recognition, and fluency. Each of these constellations of skills plays a role in students' achievement of the ultimate goal. And now you can go backwards, Bonnie, to that previous slide. To rapidly recognize and decode printed words in meaningful connected text, and to nearly effortlessly use the knowledge of the symbol system to record ideas in print. In other words, the acquisition of the foundational skills contributes to students' abilities to independently engage with and use printed language as readers and writers for their own purposes. Moving on, print concepts include in kindergarten addressing directionality, that spoken words are represented by specific sequences of letters, that words are separated by spaces in print, and in first grade, that students learn to distinguish the features of a sentence, for example, periods and use of capitalization. And back in kindergarten, that all children learn to recognize and name both upper and lowercase letters. A related standard is in the language strand, and that's for both kindergarten and first grade, and that's that we teach children to print upper and lowercase letters. Most of the print concepts here are learned rather readily by many children as a teacher and others in their lives model book handling, sweeping their hand along the print as they read aloud, commenting on print, turning pages, having print play a functional role in daily routines. Generally speaking, in terms of print concepts, it takes more effort to recognize and name all upper and lowercase letters. I've asterisked this to call attention to it, as well as to highlight that it is a high priority of instruction in the early years. Next slide, please. The framework advises in terms of this foundational skill that instruction is explicit, direct, connected to the teaching of printing. It is part of a print-rich environment, that is one in which print is used in meaningful ways. It includes opportunities to write, and there's a writing standard for kindergarten 1.3 that addresses this, and importantly, that it is differentiated. Children will vary in terms of the time and intensity required. There's that bell-shaped curve required to achieve the standards. True for all the foundational skills, we should neither delay children's progress nor overlook individuals' needs and proceed too rapidly. Next slide, please. Another set of foundational skills are those related to phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is the awareness of an ability to manipulate the sounds of spoken language. And here's where we get to the phonology part of the brain in what Dr. Gorno-Tempini was just speaking about. With phonological awareness, children turn their attention to the sound structure of speech. They reflect on the sounds of spoken language. Children become aware of different size units of sounds in speech, from larger to smaller, that is, from syllable size units to onsets and rhymes, subsyllabic units, and ultimately to phonemes. This reflects a progression of skill development, with the target being the development of phonemic awareness. And thus you see that term phoneme has an asterisk by it. And not only do children notice sounds, they're able to manipulate sounds. They can blend sounds together, they can segment a spoken word into its constituent sounds, and they can delete sounds from words. They can replace one sound for another, and so on. Next slide. The development of phonological awareness is crucial for understanding the logic of the written system, the alphabetic principle. Thus, again, we work to ensure phonemic awareness. Specifically, we get to that deepest level, the most complex level, that is phonemic awareness. Instruction in phonemic awareness is described in the framework as direct, explicit, systematic, and connected to symbols as appropriate, that it includes providing an environment that is rich in phonological play. Young children sing songs, they learn rhymes, they listen to stories in which sounds are the object of attention, and teachers draw their attention to the sound manipulations in those songs, poems, stories. It ensures that children have opportunities to write, and here's where we often witness invented spellings as children begin to capture those individual sounds in their spoken language and map them onto print. And once again, it is differentiated in order to ensure that all children develop this crucial insight into spoken language, and they learn its relationship with printed language. See especially the foundational skills section in chapter 3 for a discussion of this. We will be giving you an opportunity to dive into the framework shortly, and we have a resource guide that will assist you in finding things. On the next slide, we share a little image depicting the mapping of letters to sounds, and vice versa, by the way, as noted by the two-sided arrows. Children map the phonemes, d, a, g, to the letters D, O, G, and also can map those letters D, O, G to the phonemes D, A, G. This ability to do so, to map in both directions, requires both phonemic awareness and letter knowledge. On the next slide, we address the next foundational skill constellation, and that is phonics and word recognition. Though the print concepts and the phonemic awareness, we work hard, and the framework asserts should be addressed in our early years, preschool, in fact, early in kindergarten and in first grade. Phonics and word recognition skills are addressed early on and also up the grades. And it includes 3 sets, if you will, of knowledge. It's understanding the relationship between symbols and sounds, building from more simple patterns to more complex ones. Chapter 3 notes that instruction capitalizes on children's knowledge of letter names and shares that some letter sound correspondences are easier than others. See the chapter selection for details on that. It also, this constellation of skills also ensures that children appreciate word parts, for example, syllables and morphemes. English is, in fact, considered a morphophonemic orthography or written system. That is, both sounds and morphemes are represented by symbols. The letter S is generally used to represent plural, regardless of how it sounds in the spoken word. Notice dogs and cats. And yet that letter S is what is selected because it represents that morpheme. The spelling ED represents past tense often, yet it can be pronounced different ways. Listen as in played, walked, and shouted. Spellings are also maintained to acknowledge meaning relationships among words, even though pronunciation changes in oral language, such as in the word heal and health. That EA has a different sound, but it is retained in both of those words to reflect that common meaning. And finally, in addition, we look at irregularly spelled words. English, as Marilu said earlier, is less transparent than some languages, some written systems, and so we explicitly address that. In the next slide, we see that the importance of addressing these skills are that it ensures children's understanding of the multi-layered logic and complexity of the written system. It allows children to access and use written language meaningfully. Instruction is direct, it's explicit, it's systematic, and it's sequential. Practice is provided, and the practice is in decoding and encoding, going from the printed word to the spoken word and going from spoken word into print. And attention is given to meaning. Notice there's a connection with spelling and letter patterns, phonological aspects, and semantic connections. Again, those interactions within the brain. Attention is given to full alphabetic decoding so that children don't simply look at the first letter, but they actually can work their way through all of the elements within a word. And they progress from single syllable with simple to more complex spelling patterns to multisyllabic words. Attention is given to morphemes. I explained why that was important earlier. And recognition of irregularly spelled words. We highlight regularity in those words as appropriate. We draw attention between the points of irregularity in the words and existing knowledge about the code. In other words, not all words are like of, which are completely irregular, but they might be like island, can be considered an irregular word. And yet the I is regular and the pronunciation of the land part of that word is regular. So we draw attention to that where it exists. We discuss, by the way, the value of and the use of decodable books to support children's emerging knowledge of the code. We discuss that in chapter 3. Importantly, this is crucial to add and point out here, words that children first learn to decode should be ones in their vocabulary. We need that meaning connection, the knowledge networks, the networks of phonology, of sight, what we're seeing, those visual symbols, and meaning. And as students begin to grapple with blending the sounds represented by letters, they match their preliminary attempts with words that are already in their mental storehouse. This is especially important when children encounter printed words that might be pronounced one of several different ways, given the complexity of the code. Think, for example, about the pronunciation of the letter combination OW. Think of it in the word brown, ow, versus how it sounds, how it is used in the printed word blown. And the next set of foundational skills that we discuss in the framework and that are addressed are in the category of fluency. So next slide, please. Fluency includes attention to accuracy, rate, which is an indicator of automaticity, and prosody, which is phrasing, inflection, expression. The framework provides a chart of oral reading rate for norms for each grade level, and that chart, that research has been updated And there is a link to the updated version that will be provided in the chat. It is also available in resources that we will provide shortly. The next slide shows that the primary importance of fluency is that it frees cognitive resources for meaning making. We've developed sufficient automaticity so that we can put our cognitive resources, our attention, into meaning making, which is the entire point of learning this written system. Instruction ensures accuracy. There is an asterisk there because it is crucial that accuracy is developed in the early years. It will impact fluency in the years ahead. We also provide opportunities for practice. We model fluent reading, and we ensure volume of reading of a wide variety of texts. The next slide shares the overarching instructional principles for all the foundational skills. They are taught explicitly. Again, think about what Dr. Gorno-Tempini said earlier and the brain development. They're systematically, so we build from one to the other. They're sequential in that building. They're diagnostic. Instruction is diagnostic and differentiated. We know our learners. We learn what their assets are, what their skills are, what they've developed, and we provide appropriate instruction. Again, neither delaying students nor skipping over and moving beyond what students are ready for in terms of that foundational skills development. We make every effort to work hard to ensure that comfort with the code, comfort, competence, and confidence with the code. It is integrated into ELD instruction, and it is part of a comprehensive literacy program. And finally, I'll point out that a resource guide pulls all this information in the framework together that is related to foundational skills. It's in a single document. We will be providing that shortly. An excerpt of it is here. We share in that excerpt figure 5, which displays selected critical foci and foundational skills that are and closely related skills by grade level. This is linked in the chat and is also available in the resource document we will be providing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hallie. Hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to see all of you here. I think there's at least a few hundred people here today, which is fantastic. I just wanted to remind us all that foundational skills instruction is really fun. It's very empowering for students. I was a first grade teacher, and I just remember that it was fun and joyful. And the students, when they were engaged in it, felt really proud and empowered and confident. So that's kind of just like a purpose thing for me, to keep holding on to that. So for just a couple of minutes, I'm going to be sharing just a little bit about some guidance in the framework that focuses on foundational literacy skills instruction for multilingual learners who have been identified as English learner students or ELA identified students. And I just wanted to really quickly clarify a couple of terms, because we've been using multilingual learners, multilingual students, English learner identified students. Students who are English learner identified students are multilingual learners, but they are a subgroup of multilingual learners who have been identified as having particular language learning needs that we need to attend to by law. And that includes in foundational skills instruction. So another thing I wanted to point out is that it's really important to remember that our EL identified students, they might be learning foundational literacy skills in their home language formally in school in a multilingual program. For example, they may be learning foundational skills in English, and they might be learning foundational skills in both languages simultaneously. So it gets a little complex for English learner students who are learning English in addition to coming with a beautiful, wonderful language with all of the assets and strengths inherent in that language. So the ELA framework does promote multilingual programs, period, because it's good for kids and good for society, but because it's the ELA and ELD framework, it primarily provides guidance for foundational skills instruction in English. So that's what I'll talk about. So the good news, as Dr. Gorno-Tempini pointed out earlier, is that EL identified students can and do develop foundational literacy skills in English largely in the same way as English proficient students and at the same pace. So everything that has been said so far applies to EL students. And because they are developing their English language proficiency while they are also developing foundational literacy skills in English most of the time, there are additional considerations that teachers need to keep in mind so that instruction can be adapted and appropriate. So this is like the basketball and soccer similarities and differences Dr. Gorno-Tempino was speaking about earlier. And some of the considerations have to do with the home language of our EL identified students. Are how similar, how different is their home language to English, and that will affect how we adapt instruction. What is their English language proficiency level orally in English, and what kind of literacy experiences do they have in their primary language? Are they coming to school as proficient readers in their home language? Like I had when I taught high school ELD, I had a lot of kids who were coming, newcomer EL students who were coming as proficient readers in their primary language. And that was a great jumping off point. And some did not, had maybe a disrupted educational experience. And so they did not have as many foundational literacy skills in their primary language. That was those had different instructional considerations. And of course, the differences and similarities between the writing system. So on the next slide, and of course, all of these things can be assessed and gathered in many different ways, but it's important to gather this information. And then on the next slide, you can see that for instruction, it is really critical to build on this information, to build on what we know about our students, not to just sort of start from zero or start with a blank slate. Just like with any student, we need to know what skills and abilities and knowledge they bring so that we can work from there. And it's also really critical for teachers to be sensitive to the fact that there may be pronunciation differences based on the fact that our EL identified students are learning English as an additional language. And that doesn't necessarily suggest that they have, for example, decoding difficulties or difficulties in any of the foundational skills. It just could be a factor of similarities or differences between their home language and English. And as Hallie was pointing out, it's really, really important to make sure we are amplifying that focus on ensuring attention to meaning making, to make sure that our students, our EL identified students, understand that we read to make meaning, not just to decode. So on the next slide, this is why a lot of people don't know this, but there is a part 3 of the ELD standards that specifically address foundational literacies and skills instruction. And addressing part 3 of the ELD standards is actually integrated ELD in foundational skills instruction. And it is required. We are legally required to provide integrated ELD in foundational literacy skills instruction. So the ELD standards publication provides guidance for you. There's a whole chapter on how to do that. And also on the next slide, there are lots and lots of figures and lots of narrative explanations on how to do that as well. So these are just like little tastes of help you can search out in the framework if you are a teacher of students who have been identified as English learners. So on the next slide, just wanted to also point out that, of course, assessment is critical. Ongoing assessment, screening assessment, ongoing assessment, observation, just various kinds of assessment and foundational skills instruction. When there is some type of concern, it's really, really critical for us to take a step back and determine whether there is an issue with the instructional materials we're using for foundational skills instruction, or the assessments we're using, or the approaches we're using in instruction. And it's really important to take a look at all of the children. So there's this notion of true peers. So students who perhaps have the same home language as the student that is of concern, who have the same English language proficiency, and other factors. Those are their true peers. If their true peers are also struggling, it probably has something to do with the instruction. So I think we just have to be really honest with ourselves and be considerate of those differences and similarities and how we are approaching them. So on the next slide, I'm going to leave you with a couple of additional resources. I call these companion resources to the ELA ELD framework because they really amplify a lot of what the ELA ELD framework is saying. And so in the left-hand column, there's the book cover for Improving Education for Multilingual and English Learner Students. Research to Practice. There's a whole chapter on multilingual education. And so you can find some great guidance there for foundational skills instruction for our multilingual learners who are identified as English learner students. And then there's also grade span chapters that provide guidance. And on the right-hand side, there's the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. This chapter has a lot of wonderful guidance on how to approach foundational skills assessment and instruction with our multilingual learners, in addition to other areas of language and literacy and content learning. So with that, I know that was probably like drinking from a fire hose, but I hope that you got a few good tidbits. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, Nancy.
To Nancy, thank you. So we wanted to give you a few minutes to take a look at some resources. So in the chat, you will see a link, and it is there right now, to a document that we'd like you to take a look at and explore. The first 2 pages are different chapters from the framework with an indication of what is in each chapter relative to foundational skills. And then the 3rd page of that document also gives a link and gives you a bit of a table of contents for that resource guide to the foundational skills. I think it would be great if Dr. Yap could answer the question about the standards ending in grade 1 for phonemic awareness.
And I'm happy to give it a shot and say that it is crucial that children develop phonemic awareness. It is absolutely crucial, especially as they get launched into dealing with a code that represents speech at the level of the phoneme hugely. So it is also quite doable for most children, for many, many children, to accomplish those within grades K and 1. As we move up the grades, students will continue to work with the code system, and that phonemic awareness and interaction with the code becomes increasingly overlapping, right? And so that we see that, of course, there will be, as we talk about how things sound and how different combinations of patterns and how, notice the Z sound in dogs, and yet we spell it with an S. So when we're dealing with morphemes, when we're dealing with roots, with affixes, it will creep back up. But in terms of the basic accomplishment, we need that to be happening in those early years so that students can best take advantage of that initial instruction in working with the code.
Thank you. Dr. Yap?
We would like to return to the big picture that captures California's vision of implementation of the ELA literacy and ELD standards as outlined in the framework. Displayed here is the circles of implementation graphic. As we discussed in the first webinar of this series and in Chapter 2 and throughout the framework, the outer ring highlights the overarching goals of transitional kindergarten through grade 12 literacy education. The inner ring represents the grade level standards, the yearly path by which those overarching goals are ultimately achieved, and the ELD standards that support our English learner identified students. Circling the standards are the 5 themes we identified in the framework. These themes cut across the strands and the parts of the 2 sets of standards. They are meaning making, language development, effective expression, content knowledge, and foundational skills. We addressed the foundational skills theme today. The other themes we'll address in upcoming webinars, and we hope that you will join us for those. Not only are these themes important for their separate contributions to literacy development, but they're also overlapping and intertwined as seen in this animation. And they have reciprocal and complex relationships with one another. They change positions with one another in terms of the area of focus. At times, under certain conditions, one theme will receive greater attention than the others, but never exclusive attention. This webinar addressed foundational skills, and one of our key points is that the foundational skills must be developed and mastered to ensure children's independence with written language, the symbolic code used to capture spoken language. Their acquisition is also crucial for the other themes to continue to develop. Language development, content knowledge, effective expression, and meaning making are all propelled forward when we can engage competently and confidently with the written system. And progress in each of those themes, in turn, contributes to children's understanding of the logic of our written system. They also provide an authentic purpose for acquiring the foundational skills. As discussed in our first webinar of this series, the graphic also displays the context in which the framework argues teaching and learning should occur. That is, instruction should occur in a context that respects learners, what they know, what they need, their assets, interests, cultures, languages, and experiences with printed language, English as well as other language, and that capitalize and build on that. A context that is motivating and engaging for children, that's intellectually challenging with appropriate and targeted instruction, and that is integrated as children, students read, write, speak, and listen across the curriculum for a range of purposes. Acquisition of the foundational skills is empowering. Well-taught children will delight in their increasing abilities to engage as readers and writers. We synthesize research in the framework and we provide examples of instruction. Our hope is that educators, too, feel empowered in their important work to help all children succeed. Bonnie?
What we're going to do now is close out. First, there are outcomes. Did we learn how the brain research has informed the teaching of literacy? I think there's questions in the chat that shows that there is motivation to learn more and understanding the role of foundational skills in literacy development, which I think we did a great job of today, and guidance that the framework provides, understanding the role of foundational skills for multilingual learners. We learned that both instructionally and also what it looks like in the brain, and identifying sources. And I'm hoping that that guide opened up for everyone. I went ahead and I put it in the chat again. We do have upcoming webinars, a second Tuesday of every month, 3:30 to 4:45. Next one is November, on integrated and designated ELD and multilingual programs, then December language development, January meaning making, February effective expression, March content knowledge, April assessment and intervention, and May systems for implementation in the California Literacy Roadmap. If you need our contact information, Nancy and I, here's our information. Both mine is bogarcia@cde.ca.gov, phone number 916-445-7098. Nancy's is nbrenelson@cde.ca.gov and 916-445-2426. And before we go, I think we have a few more minutes for maybe like 1 minute for a question for Dr. Gorno Tempini. I'm going to stop sharing here. And I'm going to look in the chat for, we had several Dr. Tempini, Gorno Tempini. It's one of the questions, let me see. And if somebody sees one before me, please feel free to. So,
Well, we had one question that asked, how does it work for folks who are blind or visually impaired? Are the same brain areas activated and involved?
there you go. Thank you. We had a lot of questions today.
That's such a wonderful and complicated question. The age at which these differences appear are super important. So if someone is congenitally blind or congenitally deaf, they've never heard or seen language, then the reorganization of the brain is much more massive. So much so that some areas that are specific for vision in typically developing individuals can become specialized for touch. So it really depends. And this is something that maybe I didn't mention. For some of the development of the brain structure and networks, there are critical periods. So there are times in which strategic and connections and maturation happens that if we miss, they're gone. And that is slightly different for different people, but there are certain aspects that are very specific. For instance, I think we've all had the experience of having to patch the eye of a child who has strabismus, because otherwise they might lose the brain mechanism of vision from that eye, even if the eye per se is efficient and is not malfunctioning in any way. Because the two eyes see so differently, the brain actually shuts down the areas that are connected with the eye that doesn't see well. And if we don't patch the eye early enough, it doesn't come back. The vision, part of that part of the brain doesn't come back. And now this is a very extreme example, but it does tell us that there are critical periods, which goes a little bit to what Hallie was saying about developing some phonological awareness. There is a time in which those links are made more easily, and although they can still be made later on, there is a specific time in which the system is more efficient. It doesn't happen like with what I said with vision, that then the opportunity is lost. Of course, we can still learn it later on, but there are particular times in which the brain is particularly efficient. And for instance, I think we don't use enough the plasticity of the adolescent brain and how the frontal lobes are developing, and we could work a lot more both in the basic research and clinical sides and in the education side of taking into account the strengths and weaknesses of adolescent brain. So that was a long it was a long answer, but depending on how early these differences in vision or hearing happen, the brain can reorganize in very different ways. I guess
Thank you.
A short answer.
Thank you, Dar. It's a complicated question. It's an important question, with definitely a lot of consideration. So thank you. And we are at time. In the chat, I am putting a survey that will help us drive our next webinar, which will be in November. I want to thank our 3 co-authors for imparting their knowledge and their practices, and also Dr. Marilu Gorno-Tampini for all of your work and for spending time with us today and answering questions, and Superintendent Thurmond for his leadership. We look forward to having you at our next event, and thank you again for being here.